It looks like we made it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Friday. I hope everybody had a beautiful week. I hope that like some small miracle happened in your life and you're just living the dream right now. I've got an incredible guest for you today, and I've been working on this intro right here. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. In the high altitude realm of Denver, where the thin air seems to whisper untold secrets, strides Desmond Wallington, PhD, a psychologist as enigmatic as the profound journeys he facilitates. With a license that allows him to traverse the landscapes of the mind, he guides his patients through uncharted territories using ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Yet his journey into the realms of altered consciousness was not a straight path. It was woven through the fabric of political activism. Wallington's Odyssey found its genesis amidst the fervor of Initiative 301, the historic campaign that unfurled in Denver calling the decriminalization of psilocybin mushrooms. It was in the wake of this audacious endeavor that his calling began to crystallize, leading him towards the realm of ketamine-assisted therapy. His voice resonated as he gathered signatures for the decriminalization Nature DC campaign, a symphony of activism echoing across the nation's capital. But before his metamorphosis into a guide of the psyche, Wallington was a scholar. He honed his understanding at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, earning a PhD in counseling psychology and an MS in community counseling. Amidst the academic tapestry, his research threads wove through the themes of forgiveness and the delicate entwining of American Indian heritage. In the shadow of his heritage, Wallington finds his fire, a passion for entheogenic and psychedelic medicine that burns with ancestral wisdom. The legacy of his American Indian roots dances in harmony with his professional prowess, crafting a unique blend of healing that transcends conventional boundaries. And he's here today, ladies and gentlemen. He's here today to talk to us. Desmond, how are you, my friend?
Oh my goodness, that was quite the introduction. You know the writers are on strike, right? I hope I'm not stepping over picket lines because that was masterfully written, kind of thing. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back. Um, oh my goodness, who is this asshole that you just invited on? Um, um, it's quite the introduction. I hope I can live up to the your little spiel there, kind of thing. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, like you said, the writers are all on
Little
strike.
me. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the writers are on strike, so they're easy to pick up right now. I
Oh,
got
I
like
know. Yeah,
five of
yeah,
them.
yeah. They're hanging out like outside of Home Depot, kind of thing, right? You can just get them. Really
Yeah,
cute, kind of thing. Well, good for you. Good for you. And I'm sure there's a lot of Hollywood writers that live in Hawaii. You know, who are just there, nothing else to do. So,
yeah.
but very flattering. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I live in a really weird moment in history in a really
Yes.
unique city. Um, I live in Denver, Colorado, and I actually do live on High Street in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, kind of thing. Which people are always like, when they come over, like, where do you live? And I give them my address. They're always like, of course you live on High Street, you fucking psychonaut, kind of thing. I'm like, yeah. I'm kind of legally obligated to live here. So thank you
Yeah.
for having me. Um, we had a really fun talk last time, so I hope I have something new and interesting to say this go
I think
around.
we always have something new and interesting to say. And times have changed since our last talk. It was almost
Yes,
a
yes.
year ago.
Hmm.
You know, the world in Denver, there's other states that are coming up, man. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the changes that you've seen in Denver. I know that you went to the the PS 2023, and it must seem like the rate of change there is happening really
Yeah, yeah,
quickly. What are
yeah.
some things going on there that people may not know about or that you've noticed in the last few months?
So you're right. I think like the last time we spoke, we were right before November 2022, um, where the Natural Medicine Act passed, which was monumental. there were three different components to it. There was a decriminalization of psilocybin, ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline, with the exception of peyote, which is good. We don't need all the white people coming in and taking indigenous medicine, so it's good that that exception was there. But it also created and there's a what do you say, expungement component of it, right? If you had any sort of criminal history related to any of those medicines, that we can remove that from your record, which is good. And then it created a legal framework for psilocybin assisted therapy in a community setting, therapeutic setting, or some sort of setting, right? Where maybe your average soccer mom who's like, I want to do mushrooms, but I just don't want to do it by myself, kind of thing, right? And being thrown to the wolves. Maybe I need a therapist. Maybe I need a group church setting, and there's some sort of framework there, right? Which is necessary, right? Because there's a lot of articles out there about people who seek out these types of services, and they've been let down by Zoloft and Prozac and the big pharma kind of thing. So they're desperate. They need something else. However, like they have to go underground to find some sort of psilocybin service, right? And then you run into all these creeps and predators, right, who take advantage of you under the influence, kind of thing, right? So let's bring this above ground, because there are good people out there operating underground, kind of thing, right? But how do we give them a path to do what they're doing, get a licensure thing, and if you do something fishy, that they can, like, that there's some sort of licensing board or oversight that can be accessible to you to get some sort of legal, ethical board ramification, right? So that was the exciting thing about 122, right? Was the creation of that maybe framework. In we're still working out the kinks. This is going to take time. There's still like a board, and they're meeting every so often, and we're trying to learn a little bit from Oregon, I guess, because Oregon has some big kinks that's happening, right? It's like, if you just want to microdose in Oregon, right, you have to go to this community center, pay $250. It's just like a little microdose and sit in a room for an hour or two, and then they let you go, kind of thing. So we're still working out, like, what does this look like, or what will this look like, right? In the grand scheme of things. So it'll be interesting to see what we come up with in Colorado.
Yeah, there seems to be a tension, Desmond. Like, as I'm listening to some of the people that are coming out of there, and I'm reading some of the articles, there seems to be like this tension between the work and the monetization.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something that always exists whenever there is something that is trying to be born as an industry, or trying to be born into the world in some ways. I guess it's the growth pangs, maybe, but it seems that the more we medicalize something, or the more we try to get science in there, the higher the cost comes. And I realize that there's insurance involved, but it's almost like the more we try to make psychedelics or entheogens a medicine, it gets so many people away from the price. Like, you know what I mean by that? So many people get pushed out because it becomes a medicine. It's almost doing the opposite of what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So strange.
It's a really good point. I think my reaction to that is like, hey, like, I guess I just got to put my political cards on the table. Like, I'm a lefty. Like, I think all medicine, any type of cancer treatment or anything you ever have to do should be free. You know,
that'd be it.
Medicaid for all kind of thing. And that's not maybe everyone watching this and whatever.
Yeah.
You're allowed to have your thoughts and feelings about that idea. But there is this kind of capitalist kind of maybe thing that a lot of people are really skeptical of and fearful of, right? And I can understand that because it is antithetical to the psychedelic experience, right? You know, you eat 7 grams of mushrooms, smoke some DMT, drink ayahuasca, ibogaine, whatever you're doing, right? And then you just have this big wazzle dazzle, like, oh, hey God, you know, you're there hanging out with God for however long that experience lasts, and then it's and come back into reality kind of thing, and those things do resonate with you on a very philosophical level. Like, how can we monetize this? Is there? It feels maybe ethically incongruent for a lot of people, right? To have that big spiritual experience and then like, well, fuck, buddy. I think I could charge someone like $5,000 for a weekend, kind of thing, to have this experience. You know, I can understand that there might be some sort of ethical qualms about that, right? And maybe that's the interesting thing that I've noticed working in this space is that there is some assholes out here trying to do that kind of thing, but there are also some really good people out there who are oh, I love your cat, who are very cute, or no, your cat's cute. There are these people out there who are very sincere and very genuine, and they're just trying to do the right thing. And like, if this can be my experience, how can I, like, the mom who's single mom of 3 who works 4 jobs supporting her kids, and like, how do I get these experiences to her and not charge her up the nose kind of thing. And it will be interesting too, because since the last time we spoke, the American Medical Association has successfully lobbied the the people who create billing codes, for psychotherapy. So we are maybe in the process of creating some sort of billing framework that if you are on Medicaid, Medicare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, XYZ, that there needs to be a billing code, right? Because the idea that, like, with MDMA assisted therapy or psilocybin assisted therapy, which should be coming out in the next year or two, that who the fuck can afford having 2 therapists for 8 hours in a room kind of thing?
Yeah.
I can't afford that.
Yeah.
That's a luxury that a lot of people don't have, kind of thing. So there needs to be some sort of infrastructure happening within that space. And I will say, and I will give a tip of the hat to Melissa Lavasani. She was the campaign director of the Decriminalize Nature DC campaign. Her husband was pretty active in the Obama campaign, from what I understand, maybe 2008, 2012. But she has been really active in trying to get more insurance reimbursement for at least ketamine, besides assisted therapy. Her organization is initially started off as the Plant Medicine Coalition, and now I think it's the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition. So the ability for access is always something we have to have at the forefront of our thought, but because we use the term entheogen, right? So
Mm-hmm.
entheogen, theo is God. If we go back to our Greek and Latin roots or whatever, um, so plants that have the spirit of God in that energy of it, um, th- there should be no barrier between me and your pursuit of God. Maybe my pursuit of God would be temperance and abstinence and abstaining from all substance use. That might be my pursuit of God, but your pursuit of God might be psilocybin or ayahuasca or any other psychedelic experience that you choose from. And I feel like as a culture, that's something that's really covered under our First
Yeah.
Amendment rights. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fascinating to me on so many levels. One thing I've really noticed that is there is this reemergence of our spiritual nature. And just to hear you bring up the word entheogen, I've been hearing the term rewilding a lot. And in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, what I think is happening is like the human soul or us as individuals are beginning to rewild ourselves. And when that
Mm-hmm.
happens, we we kind of bring God, whatever that is, back into our lives. It feels like the spirituality has been absent from us from so long. And is that too far out there? What do you think?
I like that. Um, when I went to the MAPS conference a couple months ago,
Mhm.
I had a good friend. She did a presentation about Estelle Getty. I think her husband's related to uh, Aldous Huxley,
Mhm.
kind of thing, and they're pretty well known, like kind of in the older generation of the psychedelic space. And she gave this really beautiful presentation about um, bringing the psychedelic from the underground above
Mhm.
ground, and what is that path going to look like, kind of thing. And she had done some survey research or whatever, and I forget if it was fifth or sixth place, but she said, like music festivals and concerts were like the fifth or sixth most popular places for people to do psychedelic medicine, kind of thing, which she found surprising. She thought it was going to be higher on the list. Um, and, she's like, a lot of people consider this to be recreational use of psychedelic medicine. She's like, I like the term recreational,
Mm.
kind of thing.
Mm.
Like you're and I really resonated with me because um, I grew up poor. I wanted to be able to go to concerts and music festivals when I was a teenager. Um, my family was broke as a joke, and I couldn't do any of that fun stuff, I think. But in my mid to late 20s, I had a lot more disposable income, and I could do those experiences. And the idea that something could be recreational, that you're able to kind of have a space of healing and community and connection with a large group of people, kind of thing. What made my experience, any different than anyone in a mega church? Like, having that experience. Um, Not to shame them or anything, but there is that sense of connection and that grandiosity that those medicines can create. So it will be interesting to see how we kind of rethink this
Mhm.
medicine and how we do it responsibly, right? Through a very intentional harm reduction lens. Um, and it's a big lift that we're asking for right now in this moment of history.
Yeah. I I love the idea of bringing the underground above ground. In my mind, I had this image of a seed. The seed starts inside the ground, and so too does the psychedelic experience act like a seed inside of us
Mhm.
and finally bearing fruit a little bit, which I'm always so amazed, Desmond, when I speak to you and some of my I have whenever I speak to people who have roots in the indigenous community, the language they use, the metaphors are so organic and from the earth. And then on another time, when I talk to a lot of people that are coming out of like Silicon Valley, it's so mechanistic. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like
Oh,
in my
yeah.
mind, I
It
see
breaks
this.
your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I see the thread of spirituality that weaves it together. You know what I'm saying? And I'm hopeful that both sides begin to see that connection there. But
Yeah.
isn't that interesting? The language we use and the world we see when we use that language.
Yeah. And when we talk about maybe the idea of language and indigenous cultures, I always think about Maria Sabina, right? And the term she used, I'm blanking on it. It was like mectoclinectal or something. That was the term that they had for the magic mushrooms, and that term translates into uh, into God kind of thing, like the skin or the body of God kind of thing, right? And then you go up like north a couple thousand miles up to the Lakota people. And when I did my pre-doctoral internship up there, they said that their language was a gift from God, kind of thing, right? And maybe there is some sort of connection there that because there's that kind of that. Dennis McKenna had that idea of
The stoned ape theory.
Stone Ape theory, right? And that our prehistoric ancestors were fleeing Africa, and that they were pursuing mushroom. You didn't get a kill every night, right? If you were tracking buffalo or bison or whatever you were tracking at the time, you were looking at poop of these animals, right? And what grows in their poop? Mushrooms, kind of thing. And then there's the idea that, to continue on with that the human brain just exploded in a small time of space of like 200,000 years, which for us sounds like 200,000 years, that's a long time, but for like the evolutionary people, that biologists, that's a very short window of time, right? So there is always that speculation of like, what did psilocybin do? As far as our neurological development and our evolution as a species, right? And then you look at, peyote, and and you even think about stuff like ayahuasca, right? Like it was the leaf of one plant and the vine of another plant, and they combine them, and you brew that shit for like 8, 12, 15, 24 hours. I don't know, for a really long time. And then you get this magical, mystical experience kind of thing, really bizarre, the kind of things like that. These things just don't happen on their own, kind of thing. That there had to be some sort of that the entheogenic medicine just kind of presented itself or gave itself to us, at different periods of time, and whatever we were able to like have access to, kind of thing. And then you start to muddle that with the whole like money gaining capitalist scheme, and that will be problematic, right? That you know you think, hey George, like, hey, let's give you some mushrooms 2 or 3 times, maybe over a course of a couple years, um, and you resolve your trauma, or you resolve your depression, or you get a better grasp on your day-to-day living. And this isn't going to be maybe something you need 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or even want to do again, kind of thing, right? how the fuck do you grow a business model on that? You really can't, right? So that becomes the problem, right? And that becomes the pushback that we all hear, is that, I hear that in Colorado, right? That
Mhm.
psychedelics is just going to be like cannabis again, that it's just going to be a bunch of privileged white men who come into the space and make their money, and then all the people of color are going to suffer and not be able to thrive kind of again, especially, and that's just problematic because it's part of their culture, part of their heritage, and all that stuff, right? um, and I always kind of have to respond like, if I go to the dispensary, and I buy an eighth of cannabis from Emily, behind the counter, and she's having a bad day and she's moody with me, kind of thing. Like, I go home and I'm smoking my pot and I'm enjoying it, kind of thing. But I'm not thinking like, wonder how Emily is doing, and and like, is this cannabis like been tainted? Like, like she didn't really seem like the biggest spiritual leader, like that I should be listening to, kind of thing, right? There is a difference than going to a cannabis dispensary, having a 5 to 10 minute interaction with someone, versus seeking someone out to do a facilitated psilocybin session, right? I'm not going to be looking for the Elon Musk, of the tech world kind of thing. I might be looking for, a person of color who has had struggle, and then I feel has maybe a little bit more um, credibility in the spiritual realm of things, right? So I think we do a disservice in psychedelic space when we conflate um, psychedelic um, experiences and trying to find facilitators, versus just going to the dispensary down the street, and you don't really give a fuck who's selling you the weed. You're there for 10 minutes and you put your tip in the jar, and then you're going about your day, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. It brings up so many interesting questions. On some levels, when I think about these different models and I think about the different people that are affected, it seems to me that psychedelics and entheogens in some ways are showing us that the real experts are the people with lived experience.
Yeah.
Someone who's gone to school and learned from a book that was probably written by at least large part studies that were funded by the pharmaceutical industry, versus someone that was, maybe raped as a child or who was abused
Yeah.
as a child and found their way through that trauma. Like, which one of those people is better to help you with that trauma? Someone that
Yeah.
deeply cares and was fortunate enough to have, $100,000 to go to school to learn from somebody who knew a guy who had a friend whose dad may have seen this happen one time, or someone that
Right.
actually went through it, right?
And I don't think it necessarily has to be either or.
Both
Kind
and.
of thing. It can be both and. And I'll share. I grew up. I was. My mom conceived me when she was 16. I was born when she was 16. 5 days later, she turned 17. Um, you know, her mom dropped out of school when she was in third grade. Like, I did not come from a history, a privilege kind of thing. Um, and then I think about like the most transformative experience I had with psilocybin was when I was in graduate school. Um, all right, my dissertation topic was on forgiveness. Um, so I had done, um, when I got into my doctoral program, all the people above me in my class, encouraged me. It's like, you pick your dissertation topic right away, because every paper you're going to write is going to be on your dissertation topic. So when you go to sit down and write your fucking dissertation, you can pull from this paper, that paper, and this paper, and then ta-da, you got your lit review, asshole, kind of thing. You have everything that you need to do. So I was like, okay. So I picked my dissertation topic really early. It was about around that time when they had that school shooting at the Amish church in Pennsylvania, right? And the gunman walked in and just plowed down all those, kids in that one room school kind of thing. And I saw that funeral service procession that they had. That there was this community in Pennsylvania, and they had all these little coffins going down the procession, right? And they had the coffin of the school shooter, right? Mixed in with it, because the community realized that we have an obligation to forgive. If we can't forgive other people, God won't be able to forgive us when we die. Forgive us just as we forgive our trespassers. Yada yada yada. You know how the whole thing goes. And that really struck me. And counseling psychology, you're supposed to be resilient based and focused on growth and all that stuff. So that honed in on that, did all my studying for a couple 3 years. Yeah, and I really had a really good intellectual understanding of what forgiveness was, and I got it, like on a cognitive level, right? And I say this is like a cognitive scaffolding that you have, but I don't necessarily believe that it jibed with me on an emotional level. So then, one day, fortunately for me, I come across these mushrooms, and I have my headphones on, and I'm curled up in my bed, heads over my cat, heads covers over my head, kind of thing, right? And the right song came on at the right moment, and I had a very spiritually transformative moment where all that intellectual understanding and setting that I did over forgiveness, I was thinking about my mom's trauma and my grandma's trauma, and all my indigenous lineage is on my maternal side, kind of thing. So all that stuff came up, and the whole ancestral processing happened. And then the next day, like, well, yeah, grandma was an awful person, or really a real pill, or really difficult to manage, kind of thing. But I get it now, but I don't take it personal anymore, right? And I was able to have that healing experience. Do I think that everyone has to go, do some elaborate PhD research and do some like psilocybin thing that but I do think that there is some sort of preparation work and some sort of like research is me search, and psilocybin isn't going to necessarily correct everything, but it is the information, the education, the self-reflection that you do bring into the experience that creates the scaffolding for all this stuff to take place. And it's not like a silver bullet kind of thing, but the more prepared you are going into it, it's like playing roulette, right? We can put chips on the board, and we're going to spin the wheel, and the fucking ball is going to fall where it falls, kind of thing. So how do we maximize your results when that ball lands in the wheel, kind of thing, right? So and I think there's a lot of maybe a need for mentorship or some sort of apprenticeship, because that becomes problematic, right? I've been in the room a couple times where some guy walks in. He's like, "Good news, everybody! I did mushrooms 2 months ago, and you know, told me I should be a shaman,
Yeah.
kind of thing. I'm here now. You're welcome, kind of thing. And it's very cringe, right? You're
Mhm.
like, okay, yeah, I guess so. Hmm.
Yeah, you know, I think that the best psychedelic experience begins in the library. You know, I
Oh
think
yeah, yeah,
right. I think it was Terrence McKenna who said, "If we don't read the books on our shelves, then we're no better than our cats and our dogs." Like,
I know.
there's so much that we can learn from the experience of others, and not that we should take everything as gospel from others, but we should build that scaffolding. And
Mhm.
maybe in some ways this contradicts my last statement about schooling and stuff, but I should try to clarify. I think that self-discovery can
Yeah,
be a really, really powerful tool. And I'm glad we have institutions out there that help people find ways to discover realities that are meaningful to them, because it's very, very important. But for those who may not have access to it, there's plenty of resources where you can go and find
yeah,
those
yeah,
voices that are calling to you, that you can
yeah,
provide that scaffolding for you, and you can find the framework or the lattice to build on, right? It's in
yeah,
some ways this is another question I have, Desmond. It seems like we do need, on some level, a mentor or a guide for the beginning of our journey, but the ultimate guide, the ultimate healing should be for people to never have to go see that person again, right?
yeah. I, sometimes I say, being a good therapist isn't being the smartest person in the room. Like, um, George, you might be smarter than me, and
Doubt it.
you might do better at Jeopardy or whatever, whatever our metric is, right? Anywho, the best therapist, right, is going to be the most curious person in
Mm.
the world, right? What makes you feel that way? Oh, what made you react that way? Or, tell me more about your history, right? Like, how did you get point A to point B? Or you told me this a minute ago, now you're telling me that. Help me understand like, it's just these things sound incongruent. Like, help me connect those dots in my head, right? These are kind of the cornerstones of any therapeutic relationship, kind of thing. You're not Jerry Springer, like, being angry and upset, with the other person. So there's that component of it, right? And you kind of have to, that is a really useful, important skill
Yeah.
set to have, right? And you have to have maybe understanding of neurobiology and trauma and the effects that has on the brain. It's not super convoluted. That I feel like your average person can can learn that kind of thing. You know, uh, it's I think maybe the barrier is that because these things have been criminalized
Mm.
and medicalized to the degree that they are, that the um, maybe the traditional way of how these things have presented themselves in indigenous cultures may not be accessible anymore. You think about a little bit farther removed in history, right? Of people who might just be really empathic or empathetic, and they have some sort of innate skill set, right? To be a facilitator, right? And the medicine man kind of recognized that in the person. Like, hey, you buddy, like, I'm gonna apprentice you, and I'm going to teach you because
Mm-hmm.
I've done enough ayahuasca to know that I'm gonna die.
Mm. Yeah.
And There's got to be some other person that does this shit when I leave, kind of thing, right? I that's where maybe the cultural deterioration has happened, right? And it becomes problematic when we think about uh, the role that colonialization has had with indigenous people. Is that traditionally Judeo-Christian value systems is placed on temperance and sobriety and not and being clean as a whistle kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And then you have these indigenous people whose history on is like peyote, ayahuasca, psilocybin, ibogaine, like that opens stuff up. That maybe sobriety and temperance isn't the metric stick that we're or measuring stick that we use, right? So this is kind of going to be part of our ongoing conversation, right? And especially, I think there's a really interesting conversation happening right now about like, can you be a effective psilocybin facilitator and never taken psilocybin, right? Like, oh yeah, I did my training at Johns Hopkins, like but I've never touched anything ever kind of thing, and oh,
I think you know.
yeah, I'm not gonna say it, but you
I'll
can
say
read
it. There's
between
no
this.
possible way it can
Just read
happen. You
between
cannot
those
be.
lines.
It's impossible. Like you don't
Yeah,
know what you don't know, and like
I
to try and
know.
the blind leading the blind. It's
Yeah,
it's
you need to see
it's.
how the sausage is made, kind of thing, right? I don't know.
Here's one. Let's take that one roll deeper. What about the
Uh-huh.
people that are studying psychedelics and have never taken psychedelics? Like
And how
what does it
bizarre is
mean?
that? How
Yeah,
bizarre
I
is
know.
that, right?
It's like I'm like, first off, thanks for your research. That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
I love what's going
Uh-huh.
on.
Uh-huh.
But don't you think maybe it would be more interesting if you had the experience and then did the research? Like, might that open up new avenues? And you start looking at the millions of dollars that certain people have behind
Yeah,
them to study things for 20 years. And you're like, oh, what was it like when you did it? And they're like, what?
I
I'm like,
know.
what was it like when you did psychedelics? And
I know, and it's usually the worst people, right? like the people you would never want to have at a dinner party because they like I don't want you talking to my grandma, kind of thing, or my neighbor, kind of thing, and they're like, well, it's not for me, but there's going to be a marketplace, and and all that stuff, right? It's always those assholes, right? Who don't want to do it, and there might be one or two trepidatious people maybe in the
sure,
room, like, well, I don't know, my dad had schizophrenia, or my brother had
agreed,
schizoaffective disorder.
agreed.
I'm worried that they could put me in a vulnerable place. As far as that. Um,
See, this one brings up, I just want to inject for 1 minute because this brings up something really incredible. I realize, I don't realize, I've read the research that people who do have mental disorders like schizophrenia or have it in their family, there's literature that talks about that connection of having a psychedelic experience could trigger something like that. But it's interesting because I think that there's a clear delineation here because it seems to me that in the indigenous community, when I talk to people like Dr.
mhm,
Jessica Rochester
mhm.
or yourself,
Uh-huh.
there seems to be a healthy respect for
Yeah,
entheogens. And in the
yeah,
West, there seems to be a fear of it.
yeah,
And those
yeah,
are two different models. Like if you
yeah,
respect something, you're very cautious and you know people that work with it and you have a lineage. If you fear something, you criminalize it and you make it
yeah.
dangerous. It's It's interesting. What do you think about those two, that little dichotomy there?
Well, again, the fear part, right? That's the part that, as you're talking about it, that really rings in my ears.
Okay.
Because I don't know necessarily, schizophrenia or some sort of psychosis is always feared within indigenous communities. Just like it can be, sometimes it might be celebrated, right? Like you have your, like my buddy Glenn might have one foot in the physical realm, and he might have one foot in the spiritual realm, right? And there's a place and space for him within the community, kind of thing, right? That he might have access to information or knowledge that the people who don't have some sort of neurological barrier or typical neurological functioning might experience, kind of thing, right? So I don't necessarily think that we indigenous people necessarily pathologize people who might be labeled as having conditions or disorders or whatever kind of thing, right? I think that might be a difference, between the two. And when you live in a very Western model that values production and, are you able to work 9 to 5 and, what's your 401k look like? Kind of thing. You're not really valued in that culture, kind of thing. And that's going to be the other kind of maybe layer of this problem, right? It is because I've seen situations where people who've had these disorders, their symptoms increase, right? They become what I might, if I was their therapist, label as delusional, or the delusions of grandeur, or whatever I might label that kind of thing. And Western Europeans don't necessarily value that or want that, or they see it as a bad thing. But in indigenous culture, it's like, how can we accommodate you? What can we do to make space for you? How do we, make you a part of our community and group, kind of thing? We're we're not too far along away from people like Rose Kennedy being lobotomized, kind of thing, right? And that's, I think that's more of a cultural problem than anything.
I'm reminded of King Kesey's "One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest."
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
It's interesting too. I've been speaking with Dr. David Sullivan, who's the creative director of Christopher Newport University. We've been doing this series on medieval mystics, like Richard Rolle and Marjorie Kemp. All of these people heard voices. They heard music, and the Christian church at that time was like the beginning of like, these guys are nuts, where just a few years ago, they were the divine, they were the muses, they were the Isaiahs, they were the prophets, they were the people that were listening to the sound of God.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. We would have no biblical texts if it wasn't for any of these people. Let's go a spade, right?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
The point, I was just saying, like, maybe the voices you hear, what's wrong with hearing voices that are God? What's wrong with the planet talking to you?
Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful. It's scary. Like it's scary to have a really intense, heightened state of awareness and hear a voice that is not in the room. But what is the voice saying? Maybe if you can be around that voice enough, you can listen to that. Maybe that's the voice of the planet. Maybe that's the voice of your unrealized dreams, desperately trying to shake you and make you a better person. We shouldn't run from that. Maybe that's the world yelling at us, like, "Hey, dummy, do this."
You know, I think that's maybe sometimes we are kind of maybe limited by our own mechanisms of our uh, the neurology of the
Yeah.
mechanics of how our brain works, right? I hope I don't know if I'm delusional or hallucinating or anything at any given moment. The feedback I get from people is that I'm not, so I'm just gonna have to believe everybody, kind of thing. But you think about this idea, right? That your brain kind of as far as input information, it's usually audio visual kind
Hmm.
of stuff, right? I see things and I hear things, and it becomes like a tape recorder running through my brain, and that becomes the record that I'm keeping, right? Kind of thing. Um, and that's just the only sensory information that I have that's
Right.
accessible to me, kind of thing, right? And then um, I'm going to maybe really butcher this and give a really poor explanation, kind of thing. But from what I understand of like people who study like the really super hard sciences, you know, that time isn't necessarily linear, that it kind
Hmm.
of folds back in upon itself, kind of thing. But because of the limitations of my senses, it only comes in a very linear way, kind of thing. And you do read about some of these really interesting experiences, right? Of shamans who might have a little bit more access to the grand scheme of things. I'll give like the example of the most famous example, or the earliest Western example of uh, uh, Gordon Valentina Wasson, right? The people in the
Hmm.
Life magazine that went down to
Hmm.
Oaxaca, Mexico, and met with Maria Sabina and did all that kind of thing. Um, so that article came out like 1959 kind of thing. That wasn't their first trip down there kind of thing. They had been up there a couple times before. Um, and maybe a year or two before that, they sat in ceremony with Maria Sabina's, I think it was her son-in-law. You know, it was a dude married to her daughter, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and their son had been missing for a little bit of time before that. Um, and at one point after the ceremony, or during the ceremony, or after ceremony, I'm a little hazy on the details right now. But he had told them like, I see your son. He's in a gray uniform, and he's in some sort of military service, you know, over there, kind of thing. And then they got home, and a couple of months later, they got a phone call from their son, kind of thing. And he it was kind of like you think about like some guy in his early 20s in the 1950s. His fiance or girlfriend had broke up with him. He got really depressed, crestfallen, and he joined the the army. Didn't tell anybody, and they had placed him in Germany, kind of thing. You know, kind of thing. And then you read uh, Valentina Wesson's experience of that trip they did take in that Life magazine time, kind of thing. That she had this kind of feeling like she was floating and able to visit people and friends and family kind of stuff throughout the space, and she didn't realize that one of the things that she had seen was the area that the helicopter, you know, had put them down in, because to get to that part in that region of the world, they had to take a helicopter, you know, kind of thing. And then on the departing part of that trip, she looked back and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's what I saw, you know, during that mushroom ceremony, kind of thing." You know, and she didn't recognize it because when they had dropped her off beforehand, they dropped her off in a different part of the landscape, kind of thing. So I'm not saying this like this is the God, my hand to God truth kind of thing. But these are very interesting anecdotal firsthand experiences that, are where we, these are things we shouldn't be so dismissive of. And, and if this can happen to, your average Joe, Gordon Wasson was, a banker for J.P. Morgan, right? A kind of thing. Maybe maybe we don't know.
Yeah.
And this is just the basis of science, right? I don't know. What can I do to learn more?
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Sit with people that do know more.
Yeah.
I guess, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And find altered states of consciousness and where you see and view the world different. This brings me to, like, I've been zooking out on this idea of sense perceptions. I've been, my listeners are probably tired of me talking about Marshall McLuhan, but there's this great book called The Gutenberg Galaxy. And he talks about how, you know what I mean? Like after typography began to make its way into the world, the written word gave birth to ideas like exact repeatability, and it fundamentally shifted the way we see the world. We went from lived experience and finding ways to create our own realities in the world to all of a sudden having the blinders on and having this exact repeatability. And it changed the way we can model reality.
I know. Yeah. And that's just one of those things you have to talk about when you talk about like the limitations of science, right? Is that the idea of repeatability or workability or the validity and the reliability part of it, right? That I can't recreate my childhood, nor would I want to. Nor should you. Kind of thing. Right? Like, we're always in a evolving process, and we are just trying to kind of gather snapshots, right? Of this is what's happening at this time in this place in history, kind of thing. If you grew up, during Eisenhower's administration, you had a unique experience versus if you grew up during Bill Clinton's administration, right? There is no way. It's going to take a lot of smarter people than us to recreate all those situations, right? To try to kind of capture, the role of science and the humanities, right? And maybe that's where one area where we might be going astray as a culture is that we put such a emphasis on STEM in the schools and academics, which is great and cool. And we need the STEM people, but we also need the historians and the English literature, humanity people, right? Because we're always looking at that intersection, but between arts and sciences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That kitty cat is up to no good.
Hang on 1 second, man. Let me grab this little rascal.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was locked. Nice. So here's an interesting vantage point that I think it's interesting, and I think I've gained it from podcasting and talking to so many different people and so many different levels and so many cool people that have been kind enough to share their traumas with me, and in doing so, they allow me to share my traumas with them. And I think that in some ways we can go back and fix our childhood. What a pattern that I have noticed is that a lot of people that have had trauma, they find themselves in positions as adults helping kids that are going through that trauma. And in a weird way, they're helping a younger version of themselves get through that trauma faster. And in doing so, they're going back in time and fixing their childhood. If we take this abstract notion of time, that it's not linear, that it's here, it's yesterday, it's 4 seconds ago, it's now. We are moving through time simultaneously. I know that's kind of
Oh
woo
no,
woo, but
no, but
it's
no, you're
possible,
right.
right?
That's the whole thing about you look at any type of eyewitness testimony, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows it's shit, right? You know, you see
Flashbulb
the car
memory.
accident, I see the car accident, right? And we have two different narratives about what we saw, kind of thing, right? And when I use the metaphor with patients, I talk about the idea that our brains just on a machine level cannot really have any definitive recreation or recollection of what we saw, right? If I'm talking to you right now and I have a memory pop into my head from a year ago, right? That version of the memory is the pristine Blu-ray copy playing in my head, kind of thing, right? That's the best version of the history that I have playing, and then it gets tainted and altered when it goes back into the recollection storage part of it. So tomorrow, if I recall the same memory, that it gets, I get the polluted version. It's like when I'm dating myself. I don't know. When people used to burn CDs, right? You burn a CD, I burn a CD. Each burning of the CD gets a little bit more poor in quality, right? So all my thoughts and feelings that I'm having right now, they get superimposed on that reburning of the CD. So I never get like the true accurate of it. Like I'm always messing it up, and I can mess it up in a healthy way or in a negative way, kind of thing, right? I could think like, oh my gosh, that was like the worst, most awful thing that's ever happened to me. Life is hopeless. Life is helpless. And and I can have that story and that narrative, that traumatized narrative, kind of superimposed on it, right? Or I can be like, oh man, how did I get through that? Like I was so smart, I was so like resilient, and I can burn that story, kind of thing, and kind of photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, that way, kind of thing. You're distorting it one way, or the other, right? So that's just kind of maybe one of the limitations of our neurological wiring. And then there's that kind of that idea of that recreational idea that I threw out there before, that you can have this idea of and you see this, right? Maybe the best example might be with women who left abusive households, right? And they volunteer with their local domestic violence shelter, right? No one else is going to have to go through this again, and if I can do it, or if I can figure this out, I can give a hand up to someone else, kind of thing, right? And there is therapeutic catharsis in those actions that's part of the rewiring process, right? That it is necessary. One of the conference presentations I went to at the MAPS thing was talking about, if you do ayahuasca or ketamine or psilocybin or something, and you have all this neuroplasticity available to you, but you go back home to the same toxic, abusive environment, you're just re-traumatizing your brain, kind of thing, because your brain is so malleable and so vulnerable right now that if you're not going back into a healthy, nurturing environment, you're shooting yourself in the foot again, kind of thing, because you have all this potential that you're just that you're harming, right? So I think that's just as people are trying to maybe understand and um, utilize psychedelics more, that it isn't just a weekend situation that you do,
Mm.
that it is about the living environment that you return to, right? And that encapsulates a lot. It encapsulates your friends and family. It encapsulates your work health and work culture, and it also kind of envelops the political culture that you return to, kind of thing, right? That there's a lot of layers to that onion that really need to be considered. So just being an advocate for psychedelics, it's cool and great and everything, but unless you're an advocate for bigger systemic change, you're kind of pissing in the wind at that point.
I think you just explained to everybody out there why you might be one of the greatest therapists ever. Like that's so true. Like it's a relationship, man. That's so beautiful, Desmond. I haven't heard anybody really put it so succinctly before. So thank you for that. Everybody listening, like that's how it's done. It's a relationship, right?
Yeah. And it's a relationship with yourself, right? That's always an important part of it. You the ego death, right? And that people talk about that and really emphasize that. You do your whatever psychedelic you do, and then like everything, sobriety is eventual. It's going to wear off, and then your ego comes back. It's like, nice try, George. You tried to kill me. I'm back. You need me, right? You got to go to work. You got
Mhm.
bills to pay. You got to go to the grocery store, get your bread, get your milk, or whatever's on your shopping list, right? And but it's hard to feel unworthy and inferior after this kind of like spiritual journey endeavor
Mhm.
that you go on, right? So you really have to change your relationship with yourself, right? Of how you talk to yourself about yourself, and being kinder and gentler with yourself versus like, George, no one's ever gonna love you. Your dad beat the shit out of you, and like your fifth grade girlfriend said this about you, kind of thing. Yeah, that is always going to be a losing conversation that you have with yourself, right?
Yep.
Ugh. But hopefully, right, as you change that conversation with yourself, and I've noticed this too with people
Yeah.
that they've learned how to set better boundaries with people. Like I remember I've heard a couple different housewives or moms or married women say, like, like I kind of realized after this therapy that I've been doing, like, like my husband seems to instigate a lot of conflict. Okay, maybe it's just not me all the
Yeah.
time. It does take two to tango, right?
Mhm.
In these relationships, and then that's where my work as a therapist comes in. It's like, all right, ladies. So now we're talking about boundaries. Like,
Yeah.
how are we going to talk to your husband, or what are you going to say? What's going to happen? That's going to be different. Yeah. Because sure, you have all this kind of neurological pizzazz because of the medicine that you do that you just did, but that's going to wear off. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the next couple of months, 6 months, kind of thing, right? Um, but right now, you're really galvanized for change, and this is our moment to rise to the occasion. Today is a new day.
Mhm. It's I recently spoke to a graduate of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they from time to time will use psilocybin. And I asked them, "How is that relationship? Is that an odd one for you? Because it on some level they preach this abstinence." And he goes, "You know what? Thanks for bringing that up, George. it is strange because some of the people that he graduated with, they were like some of his closest confidants, want no part of him anymore because they feel threatened by him or something like that. But isn't it a weird sort of situation there? Like, you're not sober, man. You did this other thing. It speaks to maybe the rigidness of the mindset versus the plasticity of the mindset.
Yeah, and again, you're exactly touching on that idea that I talked about before about the Western value of valuing sobriety and temperance and all that stuff. But it also, that this whole mentality is also devoid, absent of Bill Wilson, the founder of right. And you know where I'm going with this, right? You're laughing already. I haven't even got to the punchline. The founder of AA, right? Who was a big advocate for LSD, the AA space, because you need for him part of sobriety and abstaining from alcohol and all that fun stuff is contingent on a very spiritual moment, right? And have a relationship with God or a higher power, or however you want to paint that. And for him, LSD facilitated that, right? And then you look like someone like William S. Burroughs, right? And his interaction, his writings back and forth with Aldous Huxley, that became the timeless essential read for anyone in the psychedelic space of Junkie, right? You the guy that he went into the nether regions of, he was the original hipster. Like, I was drinking ayahuasca before it was cool, right? He went going down to like South America and seeking out ayahuasca, right? Because he was so he was a heroin addict, right? Kind of thing, and one of our great thinkers in the counterculture and the late 1950s, kind of thing, that was a thought leader. We wouldn't have the you just said his name, one who flew over the cuckoo's nest. What's his name?
Kinsey?
Yeah, Kinsey. We wouldn't have him. We wouldn't have a lot of people without William S. Burroughs, kind of thing. So I don't. That's a question for the AA people, is like how they rectify that kind of thing, because my brain does not do those mental Olympics and like this but that kind of thing. That's a conversation for someone else. But I think it's not either or. It can be both and, for sure, kind of thing.
Yeah. Maybe like in Kentucky, maybe you can help people understand what's happening down there. It's kind of a nice segue.
Okay. Oh yeah, that was super interesting thing, right? Because there's been I just watched that show on Netflix a couple of weekends ago about painkiller kind of thing, right? About the big pharma, right, going to all these doctors' offices and pushing Oxycontin and opiates, and,
Sackler family
and all that stuff, right? And then there was the guy in Louisiana. He was a pharmacist, I think, right? And his son died, and he did all this kind of like really great undercover research, right, to kind of these doctors, right, who were just writing, prescription after prescription, kind of like there were more prescriptions than people in the state, kind of thing,
right,
going around, kind of thing. So this is, and I've seen this in my own family, and I've seen this in my own close friends of family, kind of stuff, right? And you see this in states like Utah, right? Like like the Mormon culture, right?
Yep.
Drugs are sacrilegious to them, that they get addicted, and to opiates and then the doctor stops writing the prescription, and then they're trolling the streets for black tar heroin, kind of thing, right? So we've had this devastating, immoral, all the adjectives that you want to attach to that, like issue with opiates and painkillers and being pushed by big pharma, right? Because growth, capitalism,
Right.
capitalism, kind of thing, right? And it's unsustainable, right? So people have died, and so Kentucky earlier this year, they set aside a big portion of the financial settlement that they got from the opiate settlement money or lawsuit money. I forget what exactly, if it went out in court or if they
Right.
settled or whatever. But I'm blanking on numbers. It's $47 or $74 million. So one of those two. But that's a big chunk of change,
Yes.
right? For ibogaine research, right? And ibogaine, super interesting thing. Probably maybe the new kid on the block, even as far as like the Western awareness,
Right.
because it has a
Right.
history in Africa and and everything. So
Like a
it's
foreign exchange student.
yeah. I don't ever want to give the impression that just because people in the West finally caught on to something that it's new, kind of thing. There is nothing new under the sun, right? Kind of thing. But it's sounds like it can be a really transformative medicine for people struggling with opiate addiction because of the opiate receptors, and I saw, there's some health concerns around maybe like cardiac stress and everything, and plus it, from my understanding, that's one medicine I haven't sat with, and so I don't have any of my own anecdotal story to share with it, is that it can maybe last 24, 36 hours,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So you're in for quite the ride, from my understanding, kind of thing, and it does, and it can be intense. Like it's one of the presentations I went to at MAPS, one of the presenters say that 80% ish of the people, I'm forgetting like the exact number, 83, 86 maybe, said that they had like a slideshow kind of psychedelic trip, where they went through every trauma that had ever happened to them in linear order, kind of thing, like this is your life, kind of stuff, and just having to look at that right in the face, kind of thing. But you're able to do it in maybe a more dissociative, kind of psychedelic, kind of lofty space, kind of thing. And you find therapeutic healing in that. Like a good example I heard of is like a military soldier, former military person who had PTSD, and they revisited every person that they killed in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever they served, kind of thing, and reliving each and one of those things that they endured, kind of thing, right? And this is the power of psychedelics, because people do stigmatize psychedelics as like, oh, you're just trying to numb out, you're just trying to avoid, kind of stuff. It's like, no, like if you're revisiting every awful traumatic thing that's ever happened or that you've done, kind of thing, you're doing the opposite of numbing out.
Yeah.
Removing yourself from it. You're putting your face on the mirror or on the glass, kind of thing, like revisiting all these things. And there's got to be an understanding and reverence for that, that we overcome and heal our trauma, not by avoiding, but working through it.
Yeah, there's that great quote that says, "The only way out is through." And
I know. How inconvenient is that? Right? If only there was some other way. But God damn it, it is the only
Let's
way.
try every other way first.
I know we have. Trust me. Like we tried to as much as we could. If we would have figured, if people would have figured that out, we would be doing it. Right?
You're right.
Yeah.
It's such a good mantra, right? In some ways, it makes me think of like the absence of rituals and the absence of rites of passage, and like we just don't have those. At least maybe
Yeah.
I'm talking about me. Like I don't have those.
Oh
And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's so much that can be learned in there about the ideas of time. And, you get
I
to,
know.
if there's a, let's look at the island. Like, let's take it to Aldous Huxley and look at the island where the young teenager goes with his mentor to climb the side of the mountain and sit in the church and have a psychedelic experience and maybe begin to understand, hey, this thing that I have up here is part of the world, and we can really make this place better if we understand we're part of it, and
I know.
sometimes, I don't know, what do you think about the rites of passage and rituals?
That's hard. Yeah, we don't have it, kind of thing. Or no, I'm not gonna. Not Americans don't have that.
Well said.
Right.
North Americans.
Yeah, North. North. Okay, it's really confine our boundary. North Americans don't have, right? Uh, because we really don't. I don't want to. I'm not saying this to be mean, but we don't really have. White people in America don't really have a culture, right? And that's problematic, right? Because you think of like people in Peru, right? You get to an age, and you do drink ayahuasca, and you go back to your community, and everyone else has gone through that passage, right? And there's that thing. And you can even think of like Jewish people, right? You have your bar mitzvah, your bat mitzvah, and it's a whole community thing, kind of thing, right? What do we really have? Or what do not me, but what do white people really have? And
Not much.
North America, you're 16 and you get your driver's license, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your only obligation to the society is your premium on your car insurance, kind of thing, right? The most far removed thing that you could ever think of, right? Is the idea of insurance, right? Like I'm paying my car premium, and so.
Mm-hmm.
If you get in a car accident, like our collective money goes to pay for that kind of thing, right? There really is no social safety net, that is needed, right? And for a healthy culture to exist or to thrive, and kind of thing, And this is the issue that we see when of like people in nursing homes, and there was a lot of this, like people needing to put their kids in daycare and preschool and everything at a young age because they got work and they can't afford babysitters, kind of thing, right? There is no kind of collective safety net protection, I guess, that we have as Americans, because we're so goddamn individualistic. I got mine, buddy. You figure out you, kind of thing, and that is just not sustainable, and it's tragic.
Yeah, I see it playing out, and it seems that this particular mental illness on some level is really playing out in all of our lives. And I see it a big part in like my parents and like the boomer generation, maybe because they're getting close to death, and there's such a giant demographic of them. Like I see so many people that I love and I care about that are boomers that are desperately trying to live, that are dying, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they are freaking out, and it makes me so sad. It's like they're desperately clinging on to like these fallacies and these unrealized dreams, and it's like, you need to take some time for yourself right now. Like you're knocking on the door. What are you doing? It's so fearful, and it on some level I try to see it as a lesson. Like, okay, I see what my parents and so many people I care about are doing. I need to maybe quit my job. I need to start spending some time with my family. Like, these people are knocking on death's door and they're freaking out. Like, I should start doing the important stuff now.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm grateful that I've got to see that and learn from that. It's hard though.
It is sad, right? And I think part of the issue, right, is we as a culture, we really don't speak to death, give it enough space, or kind of understand that as a part of being sacred, right? I know in most indigenous cultures, when it's mealtime, that the people who get served food first are the children and the elders, because they're the most sacred. They're the closest to death. The children just came from that space, and the elders are closest to that. So they're the most revered and the most valued within the tribe, kind of thing, right? And when we're a culture that values Botox and youth, and I just got my Ozempic shot before this thing. I assume needed to, right? When you got to be young and cute and vital and everything, right? Yikes! How unfortunate is that, right? So
Those are the leaders.
we have to really reevaluate our value system there, right? And then this idea that that um the whole experience of theogenic, right, and kind of having the ego death. I had a psilocybin experience once where um, I saw like the Big Bang and like evolution and everything happening, kind of thing. It was like in a stop motion, kind of like frame kind of thing. And then I saw people like I died, and then like my friend called other friends, like Desmond died, this happened, that happened, kind of. Then I saw like everyone that I knew died, and everyone they knew died, kind of thing. And then it kind of pulled out in like this night bright thing. You remember night brights, right? The little
Yeah,
thing,
put the little sticks
little
in.
pegs,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, I remember that.
And I was just one little peg in the whole night bright kind of experience of humanity, kind of thing. And oh, you know, that was a really powerful, important experience, that I had. But I'm still afraid to die. I'm a
Yeah.
person, kind of thing. And I don't believe anybody that says, like I'm not afraid to
Right.
die.
Right.
Like, oh, you're a sociopath. That's what you're telling me,
Right.
kind of thing. Like you have no fear, huh? But I don't feel safe dying. But I do feel safe enough, kind of thing. I think that's sometimes where I have to talk to people, like in therapy, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're a an LGBT person and you're coming out of the closet, right? You might not ever feel 100% safe coming out of the closet to someone, but there might be a friend or a neighbor or a family member that you feel safe enough coming out of the closet to, and that's where you got to start, right? It's this idea of safe enough. And so this whole idea that yeah, death is scary, and no one's ever going to feel 100% safe dying or transitioning to, if it's just nothingness, or if there's something else out there, or there's something else out there, kind of thing. But we have to start that conversation with like, what's safe enough for us to talk about, and and what tools do we have to enable us to look at that part of life because it's inevitable, right? I don't, you know, there's a Homer Simpson quote. If he's so smart, then how come he's dead? Kind of thing.
That's so good.
Right?
That's so good.
I haven't met the asshole that's figured out a way around that kind of thing. Well, let's hope we do one day. But in the meantime, it's what we're all looking at, kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, I've been actively seeking some people that one of the things I want to do, and if you know anybody that's brave enough or wants to do it, anybody listening to this, please reach out to me. I think that there is some sort of wisdom you gain, or at least some sort of understanding you get from reaching a certain age and understanding that you're coming towards the end of life. And I think that that someone that has that wisdom could speak to people,
Oh,
and it could help ease people's way. And it's, I think like a gift to give. And I think it would go a long way to help bridge the relationship between this strange idea that we put people in a home or we send them off because death scares us. Yeah. What about we bring this person back that's close to death and we have them start telling us stories? Like, wouldn't that help us, the younger generation, be better when we get close to them? And wouldn't that make that person feel like they're revered because they should be, right?
well, I think that's it's very indigenous, right? Not to like, you hit the nail on the head, right? That's the whole, if you've ever been in a room where there's an indigenous speaker, like, I hope you brought a sack of lunch because you're going to get a story, kind of thing. We like to talk and we like to share our stories and our experience, kind of thing, and we're really good at filibustering, kind of thing, and I mean that in a very sacred, responsible, or respectful way, kind of thing, right? That there is wisdom from life and experience, kind of thing, and when you're a culture of TikTok and YouTube videos that like you just get like these very 2-minute, 4-minute kind of videos, stories, kind of thing. Like it's very superficial, right? Kind of thing. That you need someone that has a long story. That's going to tell you, teach you, right? And this goes back to the arts and the humanities part of it. That I was talking about before. That you do need the quantitative, data and information and that type of stuff, but that doesn't mean there isn't space for qualitative, storytelling, and that's sacred, and that's valuable. And without that, without a context, the quantitative is useless, right?
Desmond, there's like a lot of ways I look at my life, and sometimes I look at my life like a story, and it really helps me put things in perspective. Sometimes I think to myself, oh, right now I am weaving this tapestry, and this is a very difficult part. So the symbol I'm doing that's why my life is so difficult, because I'm creating this part of my life that's going to be a very delicate symbol later, or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is there a certain stories that you live by, or is there certain methodologies that you live by, or how do you look at your life from time to time that helps you see the world in a unique way, or a fun way, or a good way?
Well, you said the magic word tapestry, right? And there's I'm blanking on, I can't, I'm not going to come off the cuff here right now, but there's some indigenous person smarter than me said, that people are part of the tapestry of life, kind of thing. And what you do to yourself or what you do to the other, it's woven into the fabric of humanity, or in nature and animals and earth and balance, kind of thing, right? You're a thread, or you're woven into the grand scheme of things, right? So it's I remember reading once, like, we don't inherit the earth from our elders. We borrow it from future generations, kind of thing, right? And I think everyone understands that if I borrow your car, I have a moral obligation to return it to you in as a good shape or better shape than what you lent it to me, and kind of thing, right? So I think it's, the idea of I'm blanking on it, but the idea that future life has equal or greater value than kind of thing, and you kind of have to think 4 or 5 steps ahead, kind of thing, right? And that's really hard for a lot of people, because a lot of people are just so self-absorbed and me. But then there's also those people out there too who want to do better and would do better, but they're just struggling to keep their head above water, kind of thing, right? And it's not that they have any sort of moral shortcoming or anything like that, but they're just trying to make ends meet, and who was it? Eisenhower or someone said, that once you make ends meet, someone moves the the goalpost, kind of thing, right? And it's again, it's a symptom of the larger, pathology that we all see and recognize and live with day in, day out in this moment in history, right?
Yeah. It's comforting at times. Like it is tough times right now for so many people. And when you have the sword of Damocles hanging over you, or, you're 100,000 in debt, or your wife left you, or your husband left you, or your kid just died, it's really hard to look far ahead when this tragedy seems to be right in front of you. It's so hard to do that. Like, I feel my heart goes out to so many people that find that, but there are one way I have dealt with things like this that has helped me is that you try and ask better questions of, like, okay, instead of why me, instead of the why did this happen to me, like, maybe you could say, what can I learn from this? And it's hard to do that, especially if it's fresh, but what are some other strategies people could do if they find themselves in that situation?
Well, I think you can ask both questions, right?
Yeah.
Why me? Like, goddamn, why me? What the fuck is it? When it rains, it pours. Why me? That's a perfectly valid question for anybody to ask at any given point. But you're right. You can also, what else can I learn from this kind of thing, right? And what can I do, or and it maybe goes back to the idea of forgiveness that I spoke to earlier. Is that shit happens, and you might not necessarily make sense, or you might not have any understanding at it at any given time, right? And that's maybe one of the things, like, when that's your value. Forgiveness is a value, and it's something you practice, right? Like, I can forgive the situation, kind of thing, right? Yeah, I can accept the situation. Just because I accept it does not mean that I like it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to like that my parent is addicted to opiates or whatever, but I have to accept that because that's my reality, and that's what's going on with me in the moment, kind of thing. And you kind of have to understand that I'm allowed to feel anger, I'm allowed to feel hurt, disappointment, or whatever that I'm feeling about the situation in this given moment. But I hope 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that I have more peace and resolution, and that I'm resilient enough to kind of get through this kind of thing. Because that's part of maybe indigenous wisdom, right? Is understanding that hey, my relatives overcame genocide. I'm living their wildest dream, kind of thing, right? I'm the culmination, and you think about what are the odds of this sperm meeting that egg and this person going on this date, and what got me here, kind of thing, right? Um, and I've been in ayahuasca ceremonies where at the end of the ceremony where the person, had you kind of sit back and reflect and think about 7 generations in the past and think about all the trauma and all the hardships and all the shit, your relatives and ancestors have gone through. And now think about 7 generations forward. What are you doing for healing and everything to be the disruption in that epigenetic kind of trauma that it gets passed on, whether it be through like a genetic, transmission of the genes type of trauma, but also the social learning part of it, right? Of just because my grandma smacked my mom around, kind of thing, doesn't give me a check to smack my kid around, and to bring that style of parenting and kind of thing. I have to be the glitch that I want to see in the matrix, or the change that I want to see in the universe, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. I know I tend to do this sometimes. I know that we're kind of coming up on time. So I thought
My
I would make
bladder is telling me. My body's telling me we're good. You're good.
Okay, so then I'll make it super complicated, this question.
I'm
Do you like
pushing through.
Okay, so on the topic of forgiveness, sometimes it seems that there's a relationship between forgiving someone else and forgiving yourself.
Okay.
I found that sometimes it's easier to forgive someone else than yourself. Like, wait, is that something that you've noticed, or what do you think is that relationship?
Oh no. So you're meeting 2 different concepts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So forgiveness is the idea that just because someone hurts you doesn't mean that you have reconciliation with that person. Reconciliation is forgiveness with the added step of trust again, and I want a relationship, and I want to be buddy with this person again, right? I can forgive an abusive spouse, or I can forgive an abusive parent. That doesn't mean I'm inviting them over for Thanksgiving and having some sort of ongoing relationship with that individual. Forgiveness is kind of this: I get it, hurt people, you're damaged, but I don't necessarily want to be around you anymore, and you've made no, like, from what I can glean, is that you're still an asshole, and you're still hurting people, and you're still moving around in the world. Good for you, but I just don't want to be a part of that anymore. But my heart breaks for you because it's a very lonely life, right?
Yeah.
If you treat everyone this way, you're going to be alone on your deathbed, a very lonely, miserable person, and how tragic that is for you. That your behavior has consequences, kind of thing, right? But then there's the idea of reconciliation, which is the idea that you forgive someone and you trust. Okay. So I'm not a big believer in the idea of self-forgiveness, because there has to be self-reconciliation. If you don't trust yourself, like, who the fuck else are you going to trust? Kind of thing, right? You have to like trust yourself enough to be able to navigate and to operate, and to know that like my decision making is good enough that I can do things, kind of thing, right? And like I can trust myself that I can. I don't have to use heroin, or I don't have to drink, or I can't gamble, or I can't do this again, kind of thing. That's the bar you're looking at, kind of thing. And trust is very fragile, kind of thing, right? So it's always good to forgive yourself, but self-forgiveness is only going to get you so far. If you can't trust yourself to make better decisions and to strive into evolving to the person that you feel like your moral compass is pointing yourself into, that's where the dirt meets the road. Is that good clarification?
That's awesome clarification. I appreciate it, man. I love talking to you. This is really fun, man. And I'm always so interested and stoked when our conversations go down these pathways that are kind of unknown, man. It's really fun, man. Thank you very much for this. I appreciate it.
I know. And I was really like trying to prep myself, like, yeah, what the fuck am I going to talk about? Thing. And then, you kind of have to have trust that
yes,
you will rise to the occasion. What comes up will need to come up. And I'm always enjoy our conversations. So
me too, man.
Thank you for having me back.
Yes, it was really fun. And I'm really thankful for your time. But before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you have coming up, and what are you excited about?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so October 1st, I'll be presenting at Crested Buttes, Colorado, the grand mecca of psychedelics. We're talking to them about psychedelics. I am coordinating with 100 Million Ways on developing a ketamine research study on trying to kind of maybe get people create like a group kind of context where there is a community healing for the psychedelic kind of thing. And those are the two things that are kind of jumping off at my mind right now.
Yeah.
Now my bladder is really getting to me.
Yeah. All right, my friend. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for everything. Have a fantastic weekend.
You too, buddy. Thank you so much.
Okay. Aloha.
Aloha.